All right. There we go. I'm assuming you can see the Sefer Yetzirah. Again, anyone who needs a copy of it, anyone who needs a copy of it, please just let me know, because I can send you a copy by email. 16. Okay. As usual, this is Sefer Yetzirah, chapter 1, Mishna 6, teaching number 6. And it's a continuation of previous ones in the in the series 4, 5, 3, 4, 5, really, where we're talking about the 10 Sefirot of nothingness, the 10 undefined Sefirot. So it goes on, and I'll just read the Hebrew first, as I always do. I'll translate, and then we'll continue from there. Eser Sefirot blima, the 10 Sefirot of nothingness. Tzipiyatan kamare habazak, their vision, or their I don't like the translation of the word as vision. The way they look, or the way they project themselves is kamera bazak, is like a lightning flash, right? Like the appearance of a lightning flash. But tachlitan, and their limit or their purpose, ein lahim kates, has no end. That's the way he translates it over here. I'm going to explain that it could mean, the word kates can mean both beginning and end, but we'll get there. Udvaroi bahen, varo means his word in them. This is also translated in different ways. One of the ways it's translated is v'dibru bahen. The sages spoke about them, spoke about the Sefirot, v'ratzo v'shov. They ascribed, or they explained that the Sefirot are in a state of what's called running and returning, Ratzo v'shov. And I'll explain these terms as we go along. Ulma'amaro, and his word, and his utterance, Kesufa, is like a whirlwind. Yirdofu, and they run after his utterance, which is like a whirlwind. They run after, they chase it, right? They run after his utterances like a whirlwind. V'livnei chiso, and in front of his throne, hemishtachavim, they prostrate themselves. Okay. Now, as I've always mentioned a number of times already, since you have the English version, have a look at the English version, the way Rabbi Kaplan translates it. He brings a number of classical commentaries. I'm not going to go into those classical commentaries, even though there are valid commentaries and so on and so forth. I want to look at things from a little bit of a different point of view. So, when he said tzipiyatan, which he translated as their vision, I'm going to translate it somewhat differently. There's two ways of looking at it. At this word tzipiyatan. Tzipiyatan could mean the way you look at something, but it can also mean two other things. It's from the expression which means a cover or a casing or a layer on top of. Like, for example, when the various vessels, like, for example, the table and the altar in the temple, and especially in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, where the golden altar was covered with a layer of gold, a layer of pure gold. So the word there that's used is vayetzapehu. Vayetzapehu means to cover something with gold. So this word tzipiyatan can mean a covering. So the 10 Sefirot of nothingness are covered over. There's a covering upon them, and we'll explain that soon. The second explanation is that it's from the word that also means to long for or to hope for, to long or hope for something. And the truth is that these two explanations, the cover and the hope, are really dependent one upon the other. Since these Sefirot are in a state of concealment. They covered over, so to speak. In terms of the light that is drawn from them, those Sefirot are kind of hidden from view. That's why they call the Sefirot the 10 Sefirot of nothingness, because we can't grasp them. They're too lofty, too ethereal for us to grasp. Therefore, our hope and longing is that they will become revealed to us at some point in time. So because they're covered from us. It's not that there's a covering over them per se, but it's just because they're so lofty, they're covered. And as I explained in previous classes, it's if the visible spectrum of light is only a fairly narrow spectrum. Above that spectrum is ultraviolet, below that spectrum infrared, which we don't see. And then there's all kinds of there's X-rays and all kinds of other various forms which we don't call light because it's not in that visible spectrum. So here too, since the Sefirot, the 10 Sefirot that we're talking about, are not in the spectrum of visibility, therefore we long for ourselves essentially to be lifted up to a higher level so that we will be able to experience them and to see them, to experience them, to see is really the wrong word, because I think to experience them is probably the better word, because seeing something means seeing it with your eyes. We don't mean seeing it with your eyes. We mean seeing it with your soul, right? So see could be the word used as long as you understand that it's the soul that sees these kinds of Sefirot and not the eyes. Okay, so therefore we long to be able to experience, to see with the soul this particular level of the Sefirot. And this is again the Sefirot on an extremely high level. There's various ways of explaining it, as I mentioned in previous classes. It could be the Sefirot of Atzilut, which is the highest manifested world, or it could be Sefirot on an even higher plane than that, the Sefirot of Akudim, or the Sefirot of Nikudim, or the Sefirot of even higher than that, the Sefirot in the Or Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, as I have mentioned. Okay. Now, when it says Kamareh Habazak, like the appearance of lightning, what do we mean when we say like the appearance of lightning? Well, it's actually a verse. It says that this is a verse in Ezekiel. I'm sorry, a verse in Ezekiel. It's Ezekiel 1:14, where the verse talks about the Merkava. The Merkava, the divine chariot, in other words, the vehicle whereby godliness becomes revealed on lower planes of existence. That's called the Merkava. It's and the word Merkava itself comes, there's two meanings of it actually. One is from the word rochev, to ride. That's what's called a Merkava, a chariot. The other is from the idea of laharkiv, to put things together. In other words, to put certain spiritual forces and powers together that form a channel whereby godliness can be revealed. Okay, so when in this vision of the Merkava, Ezekiel, the prophet Ezekiel says, as he sees the chariot, that the chariot is being pulled, so to speak. Again, this is all in a metaphor. It's metaphoric language. Don't take it literally. It's meant as a metaphor, as an analogy. And he says like this, V'hachayot ratzov vashov, kamareh habazak. The animals, these wild animals that were pulling the chariots, were in a state of running and returning like a lightning flash. That's the literal translation. Now, let me explain it not literally. When we say V'hachayot, these wild animals, don't read it as chayot, read it as chayut. The word chayut means the life force. The life force is in a state of constant flux. It's in a state of constant running and returning. In other words, just as when the blood pumps around, it doesn't pump constantly the same way. It pumps because of a heartbeat, right? So the blood, the blood in the heart is pumped out and then returns via a different channel back to the heart. And then it's pumped out. The fresh blood is pumped out again, goes through the lungs and so on and so forth, refreshed, oxygenated. and then it's pumped out again. So this whole concept of Ratzov Vashov is like the pulse. In other words, in order to really understand Ratzov Vashov, and this is actually a meditation that is sometimes used, one focuses on one's heartbeat, or if you can't feel your heartbeat, then you can feel your pulse. And that's the idea of Ratzov Vashov. The life force is in a state of constant running and returning. Returns back to its original source and comes back down again. Returns back to its original source, comes back down again. It's like an alternating current. Now, I'm not so familiar with direct and alternating currents in terms of how electricity actually works, but it's a positive negative, it's a positive negative forces that constantly interplay, and they work together. It's not that they're two separate things. They work together to actually enliven whatever it is that they're doing. So this life force that enlivens the world is in a constant state of being drawn down through the channels, 32 paths of wisdom, and then the etc., being drawn down through the Spheroids and through the various worlds, the various planes of existence, and then they return back up above to their original source. Okay, so some of the commentaries on this verse explain that if you have a look at a fire, or actually either a crucible or a kiln where they make bricks, so you'll see that the fire is constantly, because it's a very powerful fire in there, the fire is constantly, the flames are shooting up and then receding and shooting up and receding, and that's the same kind of image that is projected by this verse. Okay, so one of the commentaries then is like fire coming out of a kiln, or out of a what are those ovens that are used to bake bricks? A kiln, I think they're called, K-I-L-N, right? Let me just see here on the chat. 1 second. Ratzov Vashov, does it occur within all created beings? Yes. Someone asked me to say hello to Julio. Hello, Julio. That's Miriam is asking. Hello, Julio. How are you? Okay. Kiln. Yeah. Okay. Good. So, but the second explanation is not that it is like fire in a kiln, but more like the heartbeat of a person, where the blood goes around and it comes back. But when the blood comes back again, it's not the same blood that was there before, because it's now being energized and oxygenated by the lungs. So therefore, in a sense, it's a different life force. And so it is with the divine energy that energizes the universe. It is very short-lived, very, very short-lived, right? It comes in, energizes the universe, all the entire created universe, all the way through from beginning to end. And when I say created universe, I don't only mean the physical world, the physical universe, I mean the spiritual universes as well, from the world of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, all those three planes of existence. And then it returns, and a new life force comes in. Now, the Kabbalists explain that new life force that comes in, first of all, is a different permutation of divine names. All of them are, all these life forces that come in are all permutations of divine names, but these are new permutations. They're new permutations, and Hasidic, in Hasidic terminology, it's always on a higher level. In other words, the energy that animated what was previously is gone, and now a higher form of energy is necessary to animate it again. So things are, even though we don't feel it, and we certainly don't see it this way, nevertheless, things are in a constant, very gradual state of ascent. You're trying to envision how it's manifested within a plant. I don't know how you would explain this, but let's say, for example, if you take the example of a sunflower, right? A sunflower, and probably many other flowers as well. When the sun shines, the flower opens up, and at night it closes down, like it closes up, right? Then it opens up again and closes up. So you can see on a much slower scale, you can see that there's also Ratha Bashov even in a plant. It could be, I seem to remember seeing such a thing, but I'm not 100% sure about it. But I think that someone actually applied some kind of machine to a plant to see if there was something like a heartbeat. Of course, the plant doesn't have a heart, but the idea was that there's some kind of flow that goes both ways, up and down, right? And they did discover that there was some such thing. Now, I can look for the article that I saw. It was a long time ago, so I don't know if I'll be able to find it. I'll look for the article and see if we can see if I can find it. But I think from the opening and closing of the petals of a plant, I think you can understand it from there clearly enough that it does happen there as well. In any event, there are two kinds. Therefore, there are two kinds of two explanations of Kamareh Habazak, like a lightning flash. One of the aspects is the idea of the fire coming out of the kiln and returning. It's still the same fire. And the other one is like the heartbeat, where it's actually different blood energized with different oxygen than was previously. Yes, the blood is the same, but since it's energized differently, since it has maybe more oxygen, different oxygen, whatever it is, it's a new thing. And therefore the person is also constantly in a state of flux. This is another meditation, and this is a very practical meditation that is used in Kabbalistic meditation. And that is a meditation on one's in and out breath. How the breath is a reflection of hachayut. The energy is in a state of constant rising and falling, or descending and returning to its source, descending, returning to its source. It's only meant to be used as a metaphor and an analogy for the way the life force works. So concentrating on your breath for too long is not going to be all that productive, but it gets you into the mode of thinking. All right, let's continue. There's a nutritional flow occurring from the soil to the plant, to the atmosphere. Okay, yeah, good. Okay. Right, so now, their limit has no end. That is the way Rabbi Kaplan translated it. Their limit has no end. But other texts point out that the word kates, which is the word that he uses here, the word kates can mean both a beginning and an end. Right? It can mean the end of something. Kates kol basar, the end of all flesh, as the prophet says. One of the prophets. It can also mean, I think in Ezekiel, it can also mean the beginning of something, right? The beginning of the rope is called Ketz HaChebel, the beginning of the rope. And since we spoke previously, in a previous Mishna, in the 5th Mishna, we spoke about the end, because it says there, Midatan eser she'en lahem sof, their measure is 10 that has no end. Therefore, we've spoken about the end. This therefore must be in the beginning. So I would argue with Rabbi Kaplan's translation over here. Although it's a valid translation, I would argue that it would be better to translate it as their purpose has no beginning. Their purpose has no beginning. In other words, it didn't start at a point in time. Their purpose started at a point beyond time. It started at a point beyond the world of time. Time is only a factor in the lower worlds, in the world of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya. But but beyond time is in the world of Atzilut and beyond that. Now, let me explain what I mean here and how it's connected to what we learned before. How do we measure time? So essentially, time is measured by the gap between this ratzo and shov, this running and returning. That's how we measure time. In other words, there's a return, the energy flows down, and then it reaches the end of the system, and then returns up above, and then the next one comes in. That defines a spiritual unit of time, a spiritual unit of time. In other words, the gap between the original impulse that then descends through the system and the next impulse is usually the way time is defined in Kabbalah, in the Torah in general, but in Kabbalah in particular, because that's the chayut, the life force that's coming in and pulsing in and pulsing in and pulsing in and pulsing in, pulsing in and pulsing out, pulsing in, pulsing out. So that whole system defines a spiritual unit of time. Okay, so therefore, when we say that their purpose has no beginning, what we mean is that it has no beginning in time. It's beyond time. The purpose of these Sefirot, which is essentially to bring divine enlightenment or divine light, if you want to call it that, or Ein Sof, divine light and enlightenment into the world, that has no beginning. That always was. When we say always was, it means it comes from a place beyond time. It's not something that suddenly began at some point in time. The whole purpose of the creation of the universe was exactly for this purpose, to reveal divinity, to reveal godliness. And I will speak about this in future classes on Thursday night. Okay. So, okay, let's continue. And we say now that udvaro bahem, his word is in them. Now this can be explained, this can be translated as v'dibru bahem, they spoke about them. In other words, the sages spoke about them, spoke about these things. But the preferable translation, I think the way the Arizal and various others translated is udvaro bahem, his word is within them. What's his word? His word is that combination of divine forces, which is called, I suppose you could say, the algorithm or the DNA of life. We were speaking about before how hachayut, the energy, the divine energy, the life force that enlivens all of the worlds, all of the universes, that enlivens all of these universes, spiritual universes and the physical universe, is called his word, right? It's this algorithm, so to speak. So instead of having an algorithm of numbers, you have an algorithm of letters, right? Is in them, in all of creation, in a state of Ratzav Shov, in a state of running and returning. In other words, the permutations of this algorithm keep on changing. They keep on changing, as we mentioned before. Okay, and that, in a sense, is also like fire, which keeps on changing. It's not stable. It keeps on. It's in a state of constant change. Okay. Now, the energy that comes into the universe, which is called his word, this is, again, it's an analogy. It's an analogy. Why the term his word? Because just as a word, when a person speaks, the words become sort of separated from the person who speaks, and the words are not inside the person anymore. So too, the divine word that creates the universe is, so to speak, only a radiance from him. It's not him himself. It's him himself that's doing the speaking, but the words are just a radiance of the divine. All cyclic rhythms are measured using Ratzon Shov. Yeah, not Ratzon, but Ratzo. Okay. Okay. And that is why things are in this constant state of flux. That's why they're always running and returning. They're being drawn down and returning because it's only a radiance. And since it's a radiance, it doesn't have permanent status. It doesn't have permanence. It's in a constant state of flux because it needs just like sunlight, needs the sun always to be shining to produce the ray. Because the ray that was like 10 minutes ago, the ray of sun that was 10 minutes ago, is a different ray now. It might be an extension of the original one, but it's a different ray of sun. It's not the same thing as it was before, right? It's not, again, this is an analogy just to explain that the force is the life force that enlivens everything is constantly in the state of flux and renewal. And that's because it doesn't come from the essence. It's the word, so to speak, that emerges. And that's why it has to return in order to get renewed. Okay. This is true of all levels. It's true even of souls. And that's why some of us go through, some more than others, I suppose everybody goes through it, but you go through different states of being, different states of being up and down. I suppose, and when it's when it's extreme, then the person is called a manic depressive. There's another, that's not the hip term for it anymore. It used to be called a manic depressive. They call it something else now, OCD. I don't know what it is. Anyway, whatever it's called. But you understand, there's a person can be in completely two different states. A state of an ecstasy of joy and in the depths of sadness. Now, this is extreme. Obviously, this is not meant to be the way a person behaves. But all of us go through it to some degree or another. We have our ups and downs in life, if you want to put it that way, right? Our ups and downs, bipolar. There you go. Thank you. Yeah, bipolar. But everyone is bipolar to a certain extent. Is there ever a time when someone is always completely in a state of joy? Well, actually, there are some people that work on themselves to such an extent that they're always in a state of joy. I think I mentioned it once before with the story of Mendel Futterfass, when he told his other prisoner, if you let them get you depressed, then not only he was in prison in Russia, he was speaking to a friend of his who was in prison. They were both in prison, in the same prison. And the other fellow was saying he was depressed because of his situation. He wasn't exactly happy, let's put it that way. He didn't use the word depressed. He wasn't very happy. And Mendel told him, if they've imprisoned your body because they have the power to do so, but don't let them imprison your soul. If you give in to to depression, then they've captured your soul as well. So there are some people who are in almost constantly in a state of upliftment, if you could use that word. Maybe there's a better word for it, but in this constant state of being uplifted, of feeling uplifted. And it's something that one has to work on. It's not something one can achieve just sort of, hanging around on the couch. Something one really has to work on. And it's not being manic. It's just by changing one's mindset, but changing the mindset in such a way that it changes permanently. A permanent change in one's mindset. Okay. So that is the idea of even souls are in a state of flux, sometimes high, sometimes low. We sometimes go through high, sometimes go through lows, and so on. The objective, obviously, is to be high and then higher, and then higher and then higher, without becoming manic. Okay, so this whole concept of the divine word is revealed in the world of Atzilut, and in the other world it's covered over, and that's why we said before it's tzipiyatan, there's a cover over it, so we don't exactly see it or experience it as it is. Okay, and for the last thing is they rush to his saying like a whirlwind. That's the way he translates it. And before he's thrown, they prostrate themselves. Not everybody translates it like that. Rabbi Chaim Vital, who is the main disciple of the Arizal, explains it somewhat differently. He says that the word sufa, which he translates here like as a whirlwind, he says sufa also could mean like a straw in the wind, right? A straw floating in the wind is another translation for the same thing. So, in other words, if the divine word is, so to speak, the wind, that is the whirlwind or whatever, the wind, then we, or his word, is lifting up everything in this whirlwind and moving it around like a straw is moved in a whirlwind, like a straw is moved, a piece of straw is moved in the wind. So therefore, by his word, they are moved around and they pursue him. In other words, they pursue him, they pursue the word, they pursue their source of energy, their source of life. If they have some spiritual sensitivity, then they pursue their source of life to be able to discover it and be able to learn how to live according to that divine word. And therefore, before his throne, they prostrate themselves. The idea of prostration is not is a sense of understanding one's humility in the face of the divine energy which enlivens all of us. And it's also an attitude of gratitude, right? That the mishtachavim, the bowing down, is it's a thank you. It's an expression of gratitude. It's an expression of it's also an expression of what is called in the original terminology, bitul. Bitul means lack of ego, complete lack of ego, loss of ego, complete lack of ego when one gives oneself over completely to the divine, to divinity. So that is before his throne, in other words, before the royalty, before the divine royalty, before the divine rulership, which the throne represents, they bow down, they prostrate themselves. Okay, that is the Mishnah 1.6. Again, you might want to look into, let me just see here. Excuse me. You might want to look into Rabbi Kaplan's translation of it and his commentary. It's a little bit different than what I explained, but are there any questions? Either everyone's asleep or can you get stuck in rats? Oh, I see your spell checker. In Ratzo. Yes, some people do get stuck in Ratzo, yes. And that's exactly the opposite of the intention. Let me explain what I mean. It's a very good question. One of the stories that's told in the Talmud, and it's told in the story in the Talmud Chagiga, the Talmudic tractate called Chagiga. It talks about the 4 sages who entered the paradise. They entered the orchard. And I'm going to speak about this tomorrow night as well. The 4 sages who entered into the orchard. So of those 4 sages, one of them, what does it mean they entered into the orchard? They entered into a very high level of spiritual awareness. Such a high level of spiritual awareness that's what's called the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden is not some place where you sort of eat grapes and drink wine or drink champagne and you're lying on a couch and someone comes and serves you and you have all your physical delights. That's not what the Garden of Eden is. The Garden of Eden is the spiritual delight of the soul. So one of the sages, Ben Azai, could not contain his ecstasy, and he just didn't come back. He remained, right? One of them went crazy because he couldn't reconcile that there could be 2 worlds. How could there be this this world of spiritual ecstasy and then a physical world of tremendous pain. This was the time of the Roman occupation, when there were a time of tremendous destruction, cruelty, torture. It was the Romans were brutal people, and perhaps still, that concept lives on in humanity. It's not something that was once upon a time. There are some people that they have this brutish mentality and this brutal mentality, and it's just whatever. Let's not get into it. Let's not emphasize that. But one of them went crazy. One of them became an apostate. Why? Because he said, we've always been taught that there's only one reality, the divine reality. How could it be that there's two realities? There's this divine reality and there's the physical. He couldn't reconcile them. So he became an apostate. Towards the end of his life, he realized his mistake. But Rabbi Akiva, his name was Acher. They called him Acher, Elisha ben Avuya. They called him Acher, the other one, because they didn't want to use his name. Elisha ben Avuya. But anyway, only Rabbi Akiva, Nichnas b'shalom v'yatza b'shalom. Only he entered into the orchard, into the paradise, into the Garden of Eden in peace, and he returned in peace. Why? So they explain the reason that he returned in peace is because that was his intention from the beginning. His intention from the beginning was to ascend in order to descend and to bring back the light down to the world where it was intended to be brought down to. And that's why he was considered a complete person. He was a whole person. He understood what the purpose of creation was. He understood what we're here for. We're not here to enjoy our own spiritual delight. We're here to experience the spiritual delight in order to bring it down to the rest of the world, in order to make the world, the dark place of the world, lighter, right? To bring more light into the world. Okay, let's continue. On the notion of bittul, I've been thinking about this recently. Is this why ani and ayin are the same letters? Yes, ani, the word ani meaning I, and the word ayin meaning nothingness are the same letters, exactly. That's exactly the idea. Yes, that's the closest we can get to ayin, yeah. Now, let me just explain it for those who are not so familiar. These are two polar opposites. There's the ani, the ego, the I, the me, and then there's the I and the nothingness. What is the nothingness? The nothingness isn't that there's nothing up above. It means the nothingness of self, the loss of identity as a separate entity from the creator, or according to Hasidic meditation, not just the creator, but the one. Let me explain this concept. There's a concept of the creator of the physical universe, and the creator of the spiritual universes. It's all the same creator, but then that's beyond the creator. There's the act of creation, and then there's the act of revelation. So generally, when we talk about ayin, we're not talking about what was before creation. We're talking about the concept of revelation. In other words, the the manifestation or the revelation of godliness. So the real state of ayin is not just the beginning or prior to the beginning of creation. It is the state of revelation where everything understands that it's still in its original source. It's still part of the ayin. So there's the ani, which turns into the ayin. Same letters exactly in Hebrew. Aleph, Nun, Yud, that's ani, and Aleph, Yud, Nun, ayin. Same word. Okay, that's are these descriptions from Abraham Avinu directly taught verbally and then written down at a later date? They are quite powerful descriptions. That is the tradition. The last Mishna in Sefer Yetzirah, the last Mishna in the last chapter of Sefer Yetzirah explains that these are all the words of Abraham. Now, Abraham obviously lived at a time, a very long time ago, a time way before the time of when the Torah was given, but just as the Torah was given both in writing and the oral interpretation thereof, and the oral interpretation wasn't written down until centuries later. It was actually only written down. The oral Torah came to be written down for public consumption only after the destruction of the Second Temple. But in the year 70, after the year 70 of the Common Era, but it was preceded by thousands of years of handing down the oral Torah at the same time that the written Torah, the oral Torah, the interpretation, it was handed down from sage to disciple, and it was done specifically in that way. First of all, to put guardposts around it so that it shouldn't be corrupted, and also so that the teacher would be able to explain it to his student in a way that the student could understand it, because not everyone learns in the same way. And therefore, it was seen as necessary to adapt without changing, but to adapt the oral teachings to the student so that he would understand them correctly. And that's directly from Abraham all the way through till they were written down. According to some of the sages, the teachings of Sefer Yetzirah were actually written down by Rabbi Akiva, who we just spoke about a few minutes ago. Was Avram not a Gilgul of Adam Harishon? Gilgul means a reincarnation. Let me just put out an idea over here. We are all Gilgulim of Adam Harishon. Everybody, we all descend from that first paradigm called Adam, the first man, the first human being, the prototype. We all descend from that prototype. In other words, basically, as the Talmud says like this, it says that when a human being, the expression it uses, when a king wants to make money, when I say make money, I don't mean earn money, or when he actually wants to make coins, right? The word for coin in Hebrew is matbeya. It's related to the word teva, nature, the nature of something. So when excuse me, when God when a king wants to make coins, all the same coins, so what does he do? He gets a die, what's called a die or a stamp, and he stamps out the coins on equally weighed pieces of copper or of silver or of gold or whatever it may happen to be, and he produces the coins that way, right? He produces coins, and all the coins are identical. So the sages say that God also uses the original stamp, the original die, and everyone is different. Everyone is different. Every human being is different, even though it all comes from the original stamp, the original die, the original what's it called in what's it called? The original design, I suppose you could say. Yeah. So therefore, everybody was, Avram was also a Gilgul of Adam Harishon. Template, yeah, that's another way of putting it. Yeah. Template. Template is more in paper things, but in a coin, I think it's called a die or whatever. Anyway, you get the point. So we're all Gilgulim from Adam. Was Abraham a Gilgul of Adam Harishon? Was he more than anybody else? I don't know. I don't recall that statement in the writings of the Arizal in Sefer Gilguli, but it could be, it could be I forgot that I have seen it and I've forgotten about it. I can check it if you want and let you know. But in any event, that's where we all descend from. He was the original template, right? The original design from which we all descend. So we're all a Gilgul in that sense. Now, let me just point out that there are some you're welcome. There are some, I don't know, I don't want to call them sects because it sounds like I'm being disparaging, but there are some paths, let's call them, in Kabbalah that emphasize very much the whole concept of Gilgul. And from my point of view, not only my point of view, but from the Baal Shem Tov's point of view, essentially, which is where I got it from. From the Baal Shem Tov's point of view, we shouldn't be backward looking. We have to be forward looking. In other words, we all had parents, and we might have had wonderful parents. We might have had terrible parents, right? Some people had terrible parents. Unfortunately, they didn't choose those parents. And they were born into such a situation. If they're always going to be looking back to see what the causes, in other words, the gigulim, the incarnation, the previous incarnation, the one before that, and the one before that, or whatever it was, they're never going to be looking forward. They're always looking backwards, which is exactly the opposite of what you want, right? So therefore, certainly sometimes it's important to understand the chain of descent. Yes, sometimes it's important, but it's not the primary way of looking at things. Therefore, those paths or those sects, if you want to, if we could use that word, are far too backward looking and not nearly enough forward looking. The Baal Shem Tov emphasized that you got to start from where you are. In fact, in last week's Torah reading, which is called Lech Lecha, which I'm going to discuss tomorrow night also, there's a Torah reading for every week of the year, a certain section of the Hebrew Bible, the 5 books of Moses, that's read every week. And last week was called Lech Lecha. Lech Lecha means go. It means go. Sometimes translators go to yourself or go to your higher self or whatever it is. But the point being that a person has to start moving. You have to start moving from where you are. Go away. God is telling Abraham, go away from Lech Lecha, go away from Artzecha, your land. In other words, the place where you sort of fit into your environment. From your birthplace, in other words, from where you came from, whether it's a Gilgul or from your parents or from that sphere of influence. From the house of your father, your parents, and go now become you. Perhaps not forget about, that's the wrong terminology. Don't emphasize what was. We have to emphasize what will be. We have to emphasize how we're going to shape the future rather than how the past shapes us. Zohar Bereshit 102b. Let me write that down and I will look at it. I should remember that from there, but it could be that you're looking into the Sulam, or one of the other commentaries that has a different shita in things, different approach. All right. I will look at that and see. Okay. All right, folks. Any other questions? Thank you, Ben. All right, folks. You see, I think that what it's talking about over there is not Adam, the created. I think there it's talking about Adam Kadmon. That's what I think it's talking about. I think it's talking about the world called Adam Kadmon. If I remember correctly, that's what it's talking about in the Zohar. I will look it up without promising. I don't know if I'll have time to do it tomorrow, but I'm going to look, and I will. I'll let you know. If you're in the class tomorrow night, I hope I'll be able to tell you tomorrow night, briefly, maybe before the class starts, what I came up with. All right, folks, have a good one. Hope to see you tomorrow, and it's going to be a very interesting class tomorrow. So I hope we'll see you all. All righty, have a good one. Good night. Oh, this will be posted in Kabbalah Decoded on it's a channel on YouTube, a YouTube channel, Kabbalah Decoded. So YouTube/C/Kabbalah Decoded. All righty, all the best, folks. See you next time.